as I was listening through your albums, Regenesis and Brutalist, which I admit, I'm very sorry, I keep wanting to call brutalism. Um,
That's fine.
I want to blame my dyslexia, but can't always say it's that. Um, but something I like is there's a lot of and I guess I want to know if there's how much of this is intentional. There's a lot of cross play between the two albums.
Mm.
Um, in terms of not just like titles and some motif, but yeah, some like motifs and themes and like I was listening to on Brutalist Dance of Oxidation,
Mm.
and then off of Regenesis, the Voice of Oxidation, and
Mm.
just the maybe I don't know if you can talk a little bit about the difference sort of between those two, and anything on the connectedness of the two albums.
Oh, thanks for listening. They were created at the same time over a few years. And the way I worked for those two was that some of the tracks are up to 13 or 14 years old, but I kind of worked on all of them to the end.
Mhm.
Uh, Avell were very understanding, Avell Records, because even on the night before, I noticed one tiny sound that I wasn't quite happy
Oh
with,
yeah.
which I had to change. Um, so they share a lot of same sonic explorative ground, but I would say Regenesis follows off the end of Brutalist and begins where a roaring silence finishes.
Mm.
And so you've definitely noticed an intentional interplay between the two. It's really lovely that you said that.
Well, thank you. I like to find connections and things, and as a supposedly human being, although I'm still waiting for my DNA test to come back. I know I'll pick up on patterns. I mean, I think we all pick up on our own patterns, but I definitely see, like um, my own the relationships of things, or um, like Veiled Earth 2 was one. What was interesting was, in the beginning, it sounds like I always hate saying sounds like X in a band name because I think a lot of people often, if they're not, if they're listening in passing or they're not interested in, going deeper, they may hear that as just, oh, this song sounds like Gotek or this song sounds like Boards of Canada. But but I don't mean that when I say that. So I couch it in that. But there's the chords in the beginning. They're I don't know. They're very metallic FM synthesis and a little bit like Otecker, not just because it's two chords played low and it's like that, but there's something like that. But then the one thing I love about your music is that the your 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 background knowledge of I would say sort of maybe traditional composition, but like classical music plays into that. But you integrate the two. It's very seamless.
Oh,
Um, yeah, and I like that. Like it sounds like you know a lot of your tracks have this feel of, well, Veiled Earth has that. It's like when there's a piece part that comes in that it's detuned. Like I said, it sounds. It's like being drunk without the hangover. You sort of get that
thank
feeling of being like a little off kilter, but at the same time, it's like it's writing itself. So I don't know if you had any any insight into in that particular track.
Um, I really am pleased to hear that you feel there's a compositional aspect that could stem from romantic classical or 20th century classical music. I did grow up on that music, and I've always looked for like, I don't know if you see music this way, but I see it as there's different degrees of dissonance and
Yeah.
consonance, and then there's bridges between them.
Mhm.
And I love music where the whole structure feels like it's integrated and every aspect is talking to any other aspect. And
Ooh, I like that. That's a great way to put it.
and so if I were to draw on the music I grew up with, it would have to be really in deep dialogue with sound design. I don't actually like the term sound design because
Mm.
um, sound design is music, right? Like
Yeah,
making sounds it implies harmony and all kinds of musical decisions as much as anything
yeah,
else. So, but you know what I mean.
yeah,
It's all part of the
absolutely.
same whole, and maybe you've experienced this when you meet professionals like engineers or producers who've been at it a long time and you're young, and they're talking of disparate elements in music, like
Mhm.
oh, like I remember when I did my first soundtrack, they would ask for it without reverb. Can you send us your stems without reverb? And it was very
Like,
confusing as a teenager because it's like the reverb is the composition as much
yeah,
as
yeah,
anything else.
yeah. The effects, and I think you and I have talked about the. I heard the term ear-based music in that documentary, that interview with the guy who created, FM synthesis, and yeah, it's like I I I definitely know that feeling you say, and also like for me too, it's sort of like I think people blow off a lot of electronic music, or a lot of music in general, if it's not sort of technically super adept, or it
Hmm.
doesn't meet their technical the way their ears hear stuff, and to me it's like no, that like I said, like that the reverb is what makes the song, like the the sounds going into the reverb or whatever, and then the tails that it creates is like you know
Absolutely.
like, that's that's
Even conventional
that's the
music sounds
character.
like if you change the room size on, I like using this really old, bizarre reverb, which is, I'm surprised it still works. But
What what
whenever you
which what,
change
what is it?
the room size, I'm so bad with names, it's embarrassing.
It's
It
okay.
came with, it's still running on DX Windows kind of, it's
Oh
not even,
wow,
yeah, I don't know how it's still, most of those
that's
don't work. I should look it up. I think it's the Sonitus
yeah.
effects. But when you exploit the room sizes, it brings out all these harmonics.
Hmm.
And I mean, what you said is so true. But even from the most prosaic position, a reverb is going to imply music, and
Yeah,
it bakes into it is a whole bunch of frequency decisions. So yeah, it's strange when any given component is treated like it's swappable. Uh,
yeah, or
yeah, just
disposable. Yeah,
unless you're doing your own different versions, right? But that's a separate issue from
yeah,
C.
yeah. That's like a whole thing. But yeah, they're not all. It is interesting that they're not interchangeable. I think it's. I once asked Sean from OTEC or Unmasked on. I asked him like he'd said something in a interview or something about tuning reverbs and how like early old school hip hop, you can hear the producers tuning the reverb.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
was like, and like a lot of things that you know not just Sean, but like people who are deep sort of thinkers in this. When he said this, I'm like, what does that mean? Like how, and I remember having a big discussion, not a big discussion, but kind of back and forth on it. And I finally got what he meant was just that, like, you know, they'd run a drum machine, into like a reverb or whatever, an old, an Oberheim or something like that. And by messing with the parameters and the characteristics of the reverb, like they came up with a certain way how it was reacting to the drums, and they would
Mm.
program it like that, and that to me is like that's it's so integral, like you said, like you couldn't just. It's fun to me, like if you ever take a MIDI file of something, like a
Mm.
popular song, and drop it into your DAW, and then assign, just random voices to it. It sounds terrible, or it sounds ridiculous. That's why, like, uh, 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 you know, a Beethoven piece, if it was played, by a seal or something, at the zoo, like that, it's going to sound very ridiculous. Not how Ludwig, wanted it to sound, but when you put it with the right instrumentation, it's, it's a divinely inspired thing. So
Mm.
yeah, I like that. Now that's definitely something. That's something. Yeah, that's something. One thing I think you do so well in your music is that you combine those two. I think modalities. You know notation, you can understand it, but also and utilize the the traits and characteristics um, of a sound itself, not just like whatever the notation, the notes are.
That's very
Like
kind.
yeah, like a reverb, like in that way, or a delay or something.
Yeah, I think when I heard attempts as well at bridging these worlds, I won't name the composer, but there's a contemporary classical composer who I really like, but I think he got one effects box and a few other gizmos. And he said, now I've done electronic music and I'm ready to move on again. And I'm thinking, that's a bit disrespectful. That's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
really
Well, thanks, tourist.
evolved a bit more than that.
Once you come back and we'll show you what real, we'll show you how the countryside really looks. You know,
Yeah.
that's so
Um,
funny. Like, yeah, I would never say like, it's like someone saying they told Chat GPT to come up with a contemporary classical piece, and they're like, I'm a composer, and now I have to go
yeah.
back to do it. Yeah, I've heard, there's a number of like, um, there's some electronic musicians, and I haven't heard all of them, I will say, so I'm not gonna, blanket paint them, but there's some electronic musicians I've seen who have done like classical interpretations, and some of them I can't remember the ones that I liked that I'm blanking on, but like others, it's like, oh boy, that really it does. I think I've mentioned to you, my term a tourist, is just someone
Yeah.
kind of dropping in to play a style of music. I think the Liza Minnelli and Pet Shop Boys collaboration I know is ancient, but it's a good example where it's like, oh, these two great things, but together, not so much.
I love how
Um,
you put it, being a cannibal versus a tourist, where
yes,
on the one
yeah,
hand, you're absorbing everything and intuiting a kind of response. On the other hand, you are, like you said, a tourist. I have to
yeah.
steal that. That's
It's up for grabs. It's up for grabs. It's actually it's what I call Henry at night when he doesn't actually have to pee, but he's lured us out for walkies, and he just wants to smell the ground and listen for like moles or something. I'm like, all right, come back here, you goddamn tourist. Like, we're not gonna just fart around. But yeah, and I mean that's I don't know how much more you want to hear me blather about it, but it really is that thing. It's like I like a lot of different modalities, different styles of music myself, but I would never like try them because like
no.
I know I'd just be terrible at it, and I'd be making like I toy sometimes with I've played you some of the stuff where I'm singing, but I've toyed sometimes with releasing some stuff that I've rapped on,
Oh
and
wow, I need to.
yeah, yeah,
I've heard your
uh,
singing, but not your rap. I don't
it's
think.
yeah, it's not there yet, Robert. It's not. It's really because
I
as
like
much as
your
I
singing though.
thank you. And as much as I love hip hop and been listening to it since like I first heard it way back, in like '78 on the radio outside of New York City. I'm a tourist there. Like that's not my, you know, that's not
You're
my
exactly
thing.
right. That's a really good point though, because what we're not advocating is a self-conscious, deliberate,
Hmm.
framed enterprise where you say to yourself, I'm going to combine this with that. I mean, I'm not saying that can never work, but
Yeah,
I don't think that's how you work, and it's not how I've found satisfying results. It seems better to enjoy a lot of music and then see what your imagination gives birth to in the moment. It feels more
yeah,
like creation is happening than the creator, am choosing these very deliberate. I mean, there's some deliberation in the event management and in fine details, but it seems the best results come where you're almost not thinking. You're in a state of
Yes,
otherness. Um,
yes, and it's that unconscious thing. I mean, how woo woo you might want to get into it is up to you. But I mean, well, we've talked about our spirituality and about how that plays into our music. But I do think, yeah, I think one time I messaged you, like I was in the middle of writing. I was like, "That's it. It's right there, Robert. It came together. That's
mm,
that's God or whatever putting these things in place." And I mean, I think, yeah, it's like you're like listening and you hear something, and I don't necessarily like right now I'm working on some stuff where I'm trying some new things, and it sounds terrible, but I can
Exciting.
tell I'm getting there, but it sounds terrible, and part of that is because I just try to leave myself open to what the to what is the universe wants to put there, God, if you want to say it, wants to put there in front of me, and how I implement it. Very rarely when I say I'm going to do something deliberately and mix these two things together that either I haven't heard or I've experienced in some way. Very rarely when I sit there and say, like, deliberately, I'm going to make them, do they mesh into something good? Usually, like, they're just kind of like banging on each other and not
Yeah,
and
I
not
understand.
working. But but then again, it's like, if you experiment, it doesn't come up. If you experiment, you'll come up with stuff like that. You'll come up with things that don't work. There's a
Mm.
great quote of Thomas Edison, where when he finally invented the light bulb, he said, Mr. Edison, it took you 400 tries to finally make the light bulb. How do you feel about that? He's like, actually, I learned 399 ways how not to make them. And, you know, I think that's a little too blithe on one hand to say, but it's true. It's like, I've set out to, like, I'll set out to make a song or do something in a certain sound, and I won't get where I wanted to, but I end up finding something along the way that's astounding.
Mm.
Um,
On that
I
note,
think
I'd
that,
love to ask you
yes,
about your because I've been listening to Overworld and All Labyrinth, No Minotaur, and I think I said this to you already, but your music is like as if the best cyberpunk novels were
thank you.
illustrated in sound.
I'll take
And
it.
I think your music's a good example of that free form, intuitive approach working so well. I
Mm,
I don't think it matters what training someone has. I think the point is your music feels like structurally a complete adventure, but it meshes and makes sense too. It's sonically satisfying. And I was going to ask something specific, but I'd rather just leave it open. What are your memories and thoughts and feelings as you can remember
Well,
them about Overworld and All Labyrinth, No
well, it's
Minotaur?
interesting because they're two different albums, and kind of, I just want to say on the last thing we were talking about, Brian Eno is a great example. He's not always right, but he said a lot of brilliant things, of someone who doesn't necessarily know how to play, but is open and hears things and listens to things in a
Mhm.
certain way. It's so it's interesting. The two for me, and I don't know if you experience this, but it's fascinating to me as a musician. I have my own relationship with my music, but somebody else says something about it, and it's so different, and I and
Yeah.
I I love that. Or they hear something I didn't hear, and yeah, the cyberpunk thing I think is very accurate. I'm definitely, I think for a long time I listen, I would hear stuff and sort of classify it as space music, and yeah, it might have been like stuff from like the Berlin School, like Klaus Schultz, and Tangerine Dream, but other things that were like Steve Roach. Um, but the cyberpunk thing is very much like that. There's always, I'm a big fan of science fiction. For me, there's always like a bit of a futuristic aspect to the music, or even like maybe a fantastic element to it. With those two albums, what's interesting is they're sort of on the heels of each other, but to my ears, they're very different. Um, Overworld was almost entirely songs that I wrote like pretty much like I think like 2024 or like pretty
Mm.
the last year or two before its release. And I wouldn't say I had necessarily I didn't have an idea it was like it was going to be that number of songs and each like that, but sort of an idea that they were all under a theme of kind um, of 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 living in a time where you would one goes to Earth, like go into hiding, sort of, and I thought of subterranean living in a way, just when the world is so crazy. And so I've come to realize maybe that's just me and a little bit of agoraphobia, but um, but that's an element to it of that of overworld, whereas all 11th and Minotaur is like a lot of those songs, or some of them are like 7, 8 years old, and they're just
Wow.
I yeah. What's shocking is how I'm not saying I pulled that album, out of my ether, so to speak, but I definitely pulled it together, and it was a bunch of stuff, and I was like freaking out, like about sending it to the label to Triplicate because I'm fairly new to their roster, and I worry that some of the music's going to be so out there, like people don't get it, or it's not going to fit the label or whatever. But All Labyrinth and No Minotaur was like an idea of kind of living. To me, that image, All Labyrinth and No Minotaur, means sort of like you're running around a maze and a puzzle, sort of expecting to see, meet the monster around the corner, and you never do. So
Mm.
there's that unsettled uncertainty. That album, oddly enough, All Labyrinth, like people have said, it's very upbeat and peppy and happy. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know I could make that, but I guess I can. But like the first song on it,
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that track. I
yeah,
love that.
and of course I can't remember the name of it now, but the
Walk
first,
the Frontier.
oh yeah, Walk the Frontier. So Walk the Frontier was something that was kicking around. A lot of that album is older songs that were kicking around for a while that never came together. And I don't delete stuff. I just shelve it and I'll go back and check it because invariably, I find when I've deleted something, I'll hear it like, later it worked out really well. But with All Labyrinth, a lot of the songs were just things that I pulled out and kind of looked at, years later. So that song, it had a totally different title. But once I started working, when I opened it up again and heard it's, excuse me, it's like I heard it. I finally heard what I was trying to do,
Mm.
and not just hear it, but I could bridge the distance between what I sort of wanted to sound like, and I could play it in such a way or arrange it that it worked. And that song, again, I was terrified of sending it to people because it was
Really?
very different from what I'm doing. And then like someone said to me, "Oh my God, I love this. This is like my favorite song of yours." I'm like, "Really? Like, did I send you the right one?" And it's just got
I
I
get
thought
that.
about I thought about with that one, and I think a lot about. I'm sure you do from what you've said about these two albums, but others. I think a lot about album sequence and sort of the journey I want to take the listener on. And even though I know, a lot of people will listen to just single songs and put it in shuffle mode. If you listen to it in an order, there is there's a pattern to it. And
Yeah.
with that, I feel like uh, 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 there's a meme somewhere about, the perfect album sequence. And it has like 8 tracks and it shows exactly, where each one would be. And for that, it was like, that was a great opener. And it was sort of a good, like, invocation into me, introduction of what these songs were sort of supposed to be sounding
Yeah, it
like.
does. It signals the planet you're entering very nicely,
Yeah, thank
and
you.
it's
Yeah,
different
yeah,
enough as well that it does both. It has this sense of being slightly set apart from the rest,
yeah,
which I think is a good way of operating, but it does give you the textures and the many aspects of what you're going to be in
Yeah.
for the journey.
And it's got like a light peppy beat, and that bass
Mm,
part is just like, it's like it's a nice little dance thing. Um,
mm.
kind of, but yeah, and then oh, and like you said, you're on the eve of releasing an album, and then you're like, oh my God, this one piece sounds like shit. And of
Yeah,
course, we as the creator think everybody is going to focus on that mistake. And I'm proud to say no one said anything about the mistakes in either of those albums. Um,
that's
and
excellent.
folks focus on something else, and they hear other things. So yeah, it was really like on that. I thought some of the arpeggios last too long, and it's so obvious, and like, but no, it's like it comes together, and it's really like if I'm having a moment of clarity and some objectivity from my own music, I'm like, oh, that really works nicely well, like
Mm.
very well. And thank you. Yeah, and I'm so glad when it translates to other people. I think when other people get it. I admit one of my not pet peeves, but a block or whatever you call it is playing something for somebody and being like, do you get it? Like, isn't this cool? And they're like, it's like you feel like a little kid again or something. Like, look at this cool rock. It's a fucking pebble, kid. Like, it's not that great. Come back with a
Yeah.
diamond. But but I'm also old enough now, or mature enough, whatever, to be like, I love how that works, and I
Mm.
love that. I get how it works for me, and I love it. And if somebody else doesn't, that's too bad. It's their fault. But there are enough people out there who kind of get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I
and it's
certainly,
and that's an introduction, sort of an invitation into the album. Like, it's like here we go, and here's the next one, and then it goes to like,
it's interesting to hear you talk about the album journey because I think we go through different oscillations of how good we're feeling about our music and different periods occupy different interests. And I can say though, one area I think I've improved in hopefully is album flow.
hmm,
And perhaps that simply comes with time. Uh, for the first time in a long time, I'm really happy with Brutalist as a 2 hour journey and Regenesis as a 70 something minute journey. And
yeah.
it,
Brutalist is 2 hours. It doesn't feel like it.
yeah, oh, that's good. And
That's something I love about it is like you sent it to me a while ago, and or whenever you've done, and just listening, and like it constantly, there's always new stuff coming up for me, like stuff that I'm hearing, like, oh my God, how did I miss that the first time? Like, oh yeah, the number 18, track 18, DAR render is like, I was like, oh, what? How did I, and I think we talked about before is, that repeated listenings deliver different facets each time. And maybe not so much if you're consciously listening, but you hear and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I didn't hear that blip or that bit there. And yeah, that's a major feat you pulled off. Is that people don't realize how long might not realize how long the album is.
that's
And
really encouraging to hear. Thanks for sharing that.
you're
I
welcome.
do love
But
what you said in music. You come back to an album that's 20 years old and you hear a new layer, and it's
yeah,
like it's one of the most exciting feelings to realize that this track you've been sitting with and enjoying from another artist for a long time actually had a whole part of the framework that you were missing all this time. Obviously, you were getting the effects of it and the
yeah,
feeling. Uh,
yeah.
it's my parents do an Easter egg hunt for kids,
Oh,
and
nice.
my dad's getting better and better at hiding them. And watching them, like I have to feign excitement. Obviously, you have to pretend.
Yeah,
You have to pretend you can get in the zone a little bit,
yeah.
but watching their faces when they find one, that's a bit like
Mm.
us probably listening to a track and realizing. I'm not talking about my own music. That would be a bit weird here because you just said that. But I mean, when you listen to
No,
any artist, you
yeah,
get really excited hearing an Easter egg in there, and uh,
yeah. Well, that was something I mentioned to Sean recently. It was like finally heard I was listening to Amber
Oh yeah.
by Otecker, and I started to hear the beats differently and the drums. And this is an album that like it's one of those ones, you know, God forbid I ever have, like a terrible, injury or something. I'm in a coma. If somebody played Amber to me, I would wake up and start talking about it. Like, but there was a new a layer to the beats or something. And I used, whatever Sean got what I was saying, but I was like, I just hear this thing differently now. And it's amazing to me when anybody can put something together, not just electronic stuff. I mean, there's a lot of like older, like dub reggae tracks and stuff, something that I hear new things in them that I
Mm.
didn't hear. And it can be like, a misplayed note or, a string breaking or something, whatever. But it's like, oh, and that how that feeds into it, and the appreciation of the track as a whole. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
And
and
it's wonderful
I
your
love that.
music's got this too. It's wonderful to fill your pieces with these details. And, I'm thankful if anyone takes the time to listen. And
Yeah,
it's
very much so.
it's great to hear a general statement of affirmation. But when someone says, "Oh, at 2:39, that sound that does X or Y and Z,"
Yeah,
those kind of observations are particularly uplifting because it's half the time you've forgotten yourself.
yeah,
You can't
exactly.
anyway.
I think it's not, it's validating and it's gratifying, but I think I think we as musicians, anybody loves when they recognize a commonality between yourself and somebody else. But as musicians, like when someone, a listener, anybody, if it's another musician or just a non-musician, says, "Oh, you did that thing there," and it's like, "Oh, thank you." Like somebody, even for a moment, got as granular as I did and realized what this thing was. And uh, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, my friend Rob, who runs Component Records, and I
Mm.
was talking about how I'll master my own stuff, but it's terrible, and not terrible, but like it's not professional. And I realized for me it was mastering. I found it, he said it, and other legendary mastering engineers I think have said it, is sort of it's not necessarily as forensic
Mm.
as I think you need an eye for a detail on more of the macro and
Yeah.
less necessarily on the micro. Though of course you're focusing on frequencies and stuff like that. And I truly like when I master my own stuff. It's a plugin and it's a setting in an app, and I'll tweak it a little bit, so it has the right balance. But I don't go too much into it. But that's why, like, I think somebody else mastering my stuff I prefer, because they're going to have a different take on it. Listen, but they're also going to be looking at it from a shared perspective of a certain fidelity, a certain sound, an understanding, but then of course bring their own sense to it and their curation. I like that. Someone said that the difference between a mastering engineer and that mastering, what mastering on a song is like the artist, the musician is an artist, and the mastering engineer is kind of like a curator, and that
Interesting.
yeah, and that they see the songs as an aggregate, as a collection together, but mix them like some engineers, some folks have mastered my stuff. I'm amazed at how detailed they are, because they're like, how does it relate to the song before it and the one after it, which of course makes sense. But yeah, it's
Mm.
like people, it's so great when other people you see other people making um that connection and that effort on your work. Again, not necessarily in like, oh, I'm so cool, they're finally getting it, but it's like, oh, someone else, they hear this thing and they hear it and they see it as an entity in its own, and how it, and they have their relationship to it, but they're kind of picking up on what your relationship to it is as well.
Yeah, it,
That
it
makes
is
sense. Yeah.
It makes total sense. Also, what you were saying about mastering just before that got me thinking, do you find music making involves a degree of a balancing act? And the word compromise has negative connotations, but it's like if you want to get a certain aspect, say the effects of mastering are quite key to this,
Hmm.
you might lose another aspect, and that's part of the joy of it, is that tension
Yeah.
zone, say
Yeah.
density and
Yeah. I think
accents. Yeah.
I think if I'm picking up what you're putting down, um,
Mm.
I think it falls into the realm of constraints and how constraints and limitations are what they're a big element of creation and what makes how we can make great music or just make music in
Mm.
general. But yeah, like something it's interesting. I've been listening recently, much more so than previously. I've been listening to older stuff of mine with a heavily critical ear, um, and and
Oh man.
and I thought I was gonna start releasing something under like a cheap shot alias at George Lucas because I'm rewriting my songs in the past, but it's now I think what it is like I know in the past I think I gave up a certain attention to fidelity um, and more attention to like EQing and gain staging and mixing for just getting a song out there, just sheer compulsion of putting it out in the world. Um, and I had a few years ago, I was playing some stuff for my wife, and like we were in the car, it's a noisy highway. She was not hearing half the stuff that's in there, and it made me go back and look at older tracks and learn new techniques and stuff. And what's interesting is like, well, like I was saying before about like a brutalist, you don't realize it's a 2 hour album um, because of how well you work in longer songs to make them something that's evolving and growing and not static, and not just orally interesting, but it's like you're not doing that to just entertain people, but like you're putting forth an idea, and hopefully someone's smart enough to 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 pick up what you're putting down. And what I realized in the past, yeah, like uh, something I've learned more and more over recently is learning how to. We're gonna get cut off in like 1 minute 30 seconds.
Oh no, this is
Is
good.
is yeah, I know, but we'll come right back to it. Is packing in as much as I can within the limits of frequency range, that I hear because my ears are older and I don't hear things the same. No one hears the same as I do.
Mm.
But seeing how much I can pack in within those constraints, and I'm I'm always amazed when it works because a
Yeah.
lot of times it won't. You'll just hear this sort of mud on the bottom, and then maybe some of it comes out. But if you mix it well and everything comes out, like the bass part is clear, and you just when it works, it's so beautiful and like so much stuff is working together.
Mm.
Recording something I wanted to say off of just what I was saying before. What you were asking me about. I remember you actually. Oh, you were talking about like, am I sacrificing or giving something up?
Mm.
In music, in the realm of that, the constraints. Something I will say about the two, both Overworld and um, All Labyrinth, was really a big element of both those albums is sort of learning to trust myself and trust my own ear for my music, and just not just sending it to the label, but letting the chips fall where they may, and
Mm.
where people get it. I know some bigger artists, I've heard like, well, like Kurt Cobain, like just it freaked him out that like he would see these, like jocks and stuff at the concerts and stuff, and he's like, "Why do you like my music?" like you weren't the person, I was like listening to when I was, when I was making this. And it's just very interesting. Like you can't control how people will receive and listen to your music. Um, and I think some folks, I think it's easy to get caught up in that. For me, my thing, a lot of the big element of my growth lately as a musician is just being comfortable with putting the work out there and like trusting that you know, that I have, I have some idea of what I'm doing. And a lot of that comes from just like these two albums, like All Labyrinth. I finally got like, I can shut up at least a little bit about how weird it is, and I'm terrified of people, not liking it, and just like, well, here it is, and being okay with people not liking it, which is extremely hard. Like,
Mm,
because this is your, this is coming from your soul. I
yeah.
mean, it's literally coming from your heart and mind and your body when you make this music. And I know same for you in both Brutalist and Regenesis. There's a lot of elements of your life experience and recent events and stuff that go into it. And really for yeah, All Labyrinth was the album where I could finally, I just really started to finally get like, I maybe can worry a little less about how it's going to be perceived, and trust that, like, you know trust when other people say they like it, or when they don't, and that
Mm,
it's not a comment on my character. It may be, it may be something about where they're coming from, but more, yeah, I guess I'm learning to trust my own process more, which is, it's hard because I think, I don't know about how when you compose, maybe you can talk about this, like, um I'm very much more interested in the process. Well, obviously I want to get to like a finished song, but
yeah.
I'm really trying to enjoy and be present more to the process of not the goal, the end state, but like the process, like how do I get there and what am I learning on the
Mm,
way in? Is that how I mean, we talk about that? Like, is that something?
yeah.
What's your
I
process when you're creating?
I really enjoy hearing you say that you trust your process more and there's less of a fear in terms of how it will land with other listeners. I suppose I came to a point where I realized that my brain isn't so unique, that what I find interesting and exciting is going to be completely alien to everyone else. Not to diminish how you feel, because of course I can relate to those feelings. And we've talked before about showing your music to people. And I went through a period of, I don't know if it was self-flagellation or what was going on on a subconscious level, but I would keep showing the most, to us, nothing's extreme or not extreme. Obviously, it's all
Sure.
music and quite, it comes naturally. But I can obviously see that to someone else looking back, that would be extreme music. And I was showing over and over again those kinds of tracks to people who barely listen to electronic music. And
That's like making them drink from the fire hose. That's great.
I don't know why I was there. It wasn't like I wasn't attempting punishment on them either. So
Yeah.
yeah, if a lack of liking your stuff is unanimous enough and consistent enough, then you do feel very discouraged. And
I'm
then,
I'm
like
just
you, I didn't show anyone anything for a
I gotta
while.
ask you about that. Like were you just, because I get that, because I do, maybe it's because I'm a professional little brother and I enjoy, perverse thrill of torturing people, but like picking people who are not familiar with this kind of music or something. It's that's it's diabolical. It's dangerous, and like in some ways, I mean, what was your expectation when you were hearing from them? Were you expecting them to get it, or were you expecting them to like just not get it?
I was quite naive and innocent about it. I think it was a matter of coincidence as well that at the time I wasn't really hanging out with fellow musicians much. It was. my wife and I were foster carers actually at the time. So
Oh, okay.
uh, we- anyway, yeah, the people we were coming into contact with, sometimes they would ask, "Oh, can I hear your music?" And
Yeah.
I would play whatever I'd last been cooking up, and it was during the period where Flesh came out and Flesh decomposed.
Mm.
Um, I remember one person, more than one person, saying, "Is this even music?" And they weren't even trying to be rude. They, they were genuinely confused, and that
Yep.
wasn't my intention. Uh, but now I've realized, you know, that word random. In that period, I got accused of randomness a lot, and of course, you can do
Mm.
boundaried randomness or utilize randomness in
Yeah.
composition, but it's the same for you probably. That there's nothing random about what we're doing. Uh, if anything, it's there's such a density of decision and so many micro
Yeah.
decisions. It has perhaps a problem of not involving enough randomness at times. I don't
Yeah.
know. So that particular accusation doesn't make any sense to me, never did. Uh,
That's funny. Random.
I know. But I thought if I'm placing these events carefully and they're giving
Yeah.
me a thrill, there must be another person on the planet who likes this
Yeah.
combination of frequencies. It can't be like,
Yeah.
I'm not that special. It has
No,
to relate somewhere.
you're right. And I think I went through a similar thing like that. And yeah, realizing, I mean, yeah, that's what I was saying earlier when I was talking about Unearthed, was like realizing, oh, okay, there's more people that actually like this stuff than I think. And that
Mm,
people's tastes are probably broader than they were maybe earlier when I, shared music with them. You just reminded me when you said that one time I had some electricians come in to do some work and they came in my studio, which is where the breaker box is, and they had to look at. And they walked in and they're just, they're two guys from the trades, two electricians, and they saw all the gear and they came like, whoa, what do you do? You make music? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, what kind? I'm like, hip hop, rap? And they're like, I'm like, no, like electronic stuff. And they're like, oh, like EDM, like festival music. I'm like, kind of, but not. They're like, oh, can we hear some? I'm
kind
like,
of.
okay. And it's great that at that moment, I don't remember what song it was, but I was working on something like a really difficult song for me, just like that I knew would really push some boundaries from my music, but also with anybody, who's familiar with listening. And I played it for them and they were just like, whoa. And not because they're, not smart guys, but just it was so wholly out of their experience that it was kind of like, you know, it's like it's just it took them so out of what they knew that like, that they were just overwhelmed.
Mm,
Um, but like I said, I get that what you're saying. There's a certain naivete in playing stuff for that for people that you don't. I know for me, for a long time, I played my music expecting people to hear it exactly the way I did,
mm,
and and it took a long time to realize like they're not going to. And
yeah.
I don't mean just like my parents, but like friends and family. Um,
Mm,
and like when I share stuff with my wife, like a song or like or a video, I know it's in my best interest, and I'm going to get a better response if I say to my wife, "Hey, can I play you something?" and not be attached to her saying, "Oh yes, right now, absolutely." Like, no, sometimes some folks got to prepare a little to hear my music. Like,
mm,
it's a deep breath. Or my videos, like the videos I love, like heavily stroboscopic um, images and stuff, and I know that's not for everybody. So, like a good
mm,
friend of mine, he couldn't watch my videos because he would get seizures, and not from the videos, but he knew. And I was like, well, I'll have to describe it to you, but like I don't know. I just, that's there's something about that experience of playing your music for other people and just sort of like you know what their reaction is or what their um how it affects you. I just
mm,
for some reason I was thinking of like how for me I I read an interview somewhere with Richard Devine
mm,
where he was talking about in his music something had to be like something different had to be happening almost every bar or every four bars.
mm,
And over the years, I thought about that, and what I realized was for a long time I interpreted that as like, oh, the song has to be busy. There has to
Mm.
be lots of things going on. So you're like, oh, what? And something only recently I've come to realize in my own stuff is that there's less, it's not about it being busy so much as it well, it's got to have some sort of passion and sort of energy that compels you to want to listen further.
Mm.
Be it like a very simple, like, not simple, but like an ambient piece where there may not be necessarily melodies and themes and harmonies and stuff to pick up on, but you still want to like listen and further and like
Yeah, absolutely.
or listen to it on repeat. Um, and that's been a very interesting for me to learn how to do, because for a long time I thought, well, if I make it busy, then they won't hear the mistakes, or my where I'm lacking and stuff. And now I'm happy to say I'm comfortable enough where I'm like, well, you know, here's a song and this is what it does, and you may get it or you may not. Like, and more recently I've been doing, I played a song for a friend, and they're like, wow, it's really skeletal, like it's really stripped down for you. And I'm like, really? It didn't feel that much. And then I listened, I was like, oh, they're actually right. Like, I took out a lot of like things that I might do and just really tried to get more. I think I've said this before, like trying to get more into like the song as being, yeah, like ear based, but like sort of a little more gesture based rather than necessarily discernible melody or harmonies.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, the interesting thing when you don't have the conventional signposts in terms of melody and harmony,
yeah,
if the listener is open, it forces them to listen in a different way. And for example, really good ambient music is actually, it hogs the attention of the room, it shifts the
yeah,
atmosphere, even though it's absent of, well, it's not really absent of those components, but in the way they're usually defined. And
mm-hmm,
it's really interesting to hear you say that people perceived your music as skeletal, but you didn't see it that way. I think
yeah,
that's a common experience of mine too, where what people think you've accidentally left out, you deliberately left out because
yeah,
you want to force a different kind of perspective, and the
yeah,
feelings that come about when you're not given a melody and as a melody is usually heard. They're really
yeah.
interesting emotional areas, and I think you mine them in your music, and I'm trying to mine that kind of terrain as well.
Oh, I think you're definitely getting them. And the great thing about those two albums that I like, and I hope people will can really pick this up and maybe go back and listen to them, is that they they tell they each tell their own story. And it's not necessarily a story that's, words and verbal, like we can write down, like this is what's happening. But like they each tell their own story, but they reference each other in a natural, not necessarily like obvious or leading way. Like,
mm,
oh, I want people to pick up on this theme from Brutalist in this song in Regenesis. It's like they are two uh, they are both, like, I would say, an individual coin, but two different sides of the same coin, if that makes sense. And
that's
yeah,
lovely to
you're no,
hear.
you're definitely hitting that.
That's really encouraging.
It's very yeah, you put forward emotion really well, and
Mm.
it has that compelling aspect to it. But yeah, you're right, like really good ambient stuff, like well, like Aphex Twins, like selected ambient works too, like there's simple things happening,
Mm.
but they're arranged in such a way that they draw your interest.
Yeah.
And and yeah, it'll draw, it'll attract, I don't want to say not the right people, but it'll attract someone who's listening for that and who's aware of that, and it will compel them to move forward. I'm using that word compel and compulsion a lot, but it's
A good word though.
yeah,
Yeah, it's the thing is, some people listen to that kind of ambient music I think we're talking about ambient music, which doesn't have anything in the way of those traditional narrative.
Yeah,
Like
like
you're
an
not going to
arc.
get the diatonic melody bouncing around,
Yeah,
but the
exactly.
lead line. I mean, if you want, you should do that. I'm just saying the kind of approach we're talking about. And some people hear that as a whole load of nothing. Like I remember playing this amazing Steve Roach album called Darkest Before Dawn
Hmm.
to someone, and they just they thought absolutely zilch was happening. Like it sounded like a big
Right.
blanket of completely. Whereas my dad, he immediately was sucked into outer space, and
Yeah.
the very fact it didn't give those things meant that this burning sense of incense in the room, like you can almost smell the sounds
Mm,
and let it
yeah.
wash over you. And it has got its own rhythm, that kind of music. It's simply not as fast paced as certain other songs,
Yeah.
right?
You know what it is? I think it's that music. It, it, it requires, how do I put it? It's not that it requires a deeper listening, but it definitely rewards it. But
Mm,
it it invites it. Not sure where how I'm not putting it together, but yeah, it draws you in, and it is sort of like it's slowed down,
mm,
and the complexity or the listening aspect of it is not necessarily like, you know, picking up the lyrics or discerning or having like a melody that you can whistle along with.
mm.
My piano teacher when I was a kid was a wonderful Ukrainian woman. I don't remember her maiden name, but Mrs. Cunningham.
Mm.
Brilliant piano teacher. I would love to tell her, about all these, synthesizers and stuff I was seeing, and I told her once
Yeah,
about,
look,
oh, and this one has an arpeggiator, and it goes, it can play, notes in a repeating rhythm, and she's like, oh, like this, and she just does not with the first two fingers, but with the even her pinky and her ring finger. So the whole hand is exercise. She's like, and I'm like, oh my god, and it was like that, or like, and then, but anyway, she said something. She was like, well, the song always must have a hummable melody and like a recognizable melody, which I held as gospel for a long time. And then I realized at some point, like, that doesn't work for all sort of styles of music and
mm,
modality. It's like, you know, great, I'm trying to think like, some like, yeah, like um, albums by like Biosphere or, what's his name? Uh, is it Gas? Uh, uh,
mm.
uh, you know, there is very little going on in the terms of like obvious like notes and instruments, but there's something happening.
Yeah, something
And
very mystical still happening.
yeah, and if you're willing to put yourself in in the position where you can hear and listen to it, you will receive something. You'll get the gift.
Mm.
Um, I'm trying to remember like
It's
the
a lovely
music.
way of
There
putting
was
it, actually. You'll get
is
the
it, but
gift.
it is. I mean, I
Mm.
think that's
No,
what
I
it
have.
is for me. I hope I'm not talking too much about myself, but like for me, my music is it's my gift to the world, and not like oh, it's so fascinating. You should be so lucky to have this, but it's like no, here, this is what I'm putting out there, like
Mm.
and I'm it's a gift to be able to put music together. Not everybody can do it. Just the same as like I write. I'm told very well. I'm still, a little not on the fence about it, but I get that other people like it and other people can't necessarily do that.
Mm.
And so, we're putting this out for other people. Was it say, yeah, like, but that thing, like, sort of, like when you start doing like more ambient, less, sort of mainstream music, and you start thinking about like, yeah, what is melody and what is, what's actually moving the song along, what's
Exactly.
propelling it. Yeah, it's that's the thing I love is, when you start getting sort of, you get microscopic and like granular about sort of how, what you want to do with a piece or how it's working. It can become limiting, and it can become an albatross, but it's also a really kind of cool thing to look at and be able to see,
Yeah,
pick up
absolutely.
and use.
And it's got precedent with all kind of musical cultures. I think we've talked together about gamelan, and
Yeah, yeah.
there's all kinds of traditions which
Can,
imply a different kind of listening and a whole different conception of music.
can I say something about that? I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah, go for it.
because you treat it like that's one of my biggest bugaboos was like with people who you know hold that the highest expression of music is classical music from, we'll
The
say, from
West.
the European, yeah, the West, and the school, and like, and something a lot of people don't realize is how a lot of not just gamelan, but a lot of Indian classical music, this stuff, it's an oral tradition,
Yeah.
and it's spoken.
Mm.
And sure, you can notate it. Like what I love, it's fascinating to see. Sorry, the animals are here. Um, it's fascinating to see traditional, like, gosh, like not just Hindu, but like Tibetan notation and stuff, and how people decided like how they were going to notate this music that to Western ears can to a certain degree sound like nothing you've ever heard before. And when people poo-poo that stuff as not being up to the standards of like classical music, it's like you're an idiot. Like,
Yeah.
the time signatures they're in, and this is like the music of the people. You know, it's not simple music. It's like they're in crazy time signatures that to them is
Mm.
totally normal.
Yeah.
Crazy scales that, like I said, I've said before, like my brain, when I first heard gamelan, I started screaming, and my wife ran over. She's like, "What?" I'm like, "It's not doing what it's supposed to. Like it's stopping and changing in the wrong place." And she's like, "Maybe you need to have a cookie and listen to some Raffi, like kids music." I'm like, "No, no, I'll be quiet." But it's amazing how rich that music is, and
Mm.
and the fact that it's an oral tradition speaks so much more. I think not more, but to a degree, speaks up to the power of that tradition and keeping it alive through all the centuries or whatever. I think in a different way than were people to actually write down and learn that notation in a
Mm.
similar way that like classical music is. So sorry, I derailed you, but you were saying,
No,
um,
it's really good what you're saying. And it would be dishonest of me to play down classical music and what it did for me listening to symphonies from a young age and
yeah,
it gave in terms of structure and so many other things. But I completely agree with you. And what I also appreciate is, say, in Aboriginal music, how the music is encoding the landscape and
yes,
there's a blurring of so-called noise and music. And many cultures didn't even have a word for music because
yeah.
it was a part of a wider kind of
That's amazing.
ritual
It's
context.
it's so woven into the society. They didn't have a name
Mm.
for it. That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but it's interesting earlier when we were talking about emotion because I don't really consider what we're doing as self-expression. It feels like
Mm,
it's looking outwards as well as,
mm,
of course, it reflects uh, an interior world to a degree, but it's never a simple relationship. It's never a
yeah,
basic transcribing of emotions. And for me, I'm much more concerned with the wonder of I don't know. I just love watching videos of deep sea dives and outer space
yeah,
and that,
yep,
or that feeling of being very small in the face of a massive, unexplored
yes,
universe. That's
yeah.
a big factor in all of this. It's never like, oh, I'm feeling sad. I'm gonna make a sad song. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think it. Does anyone really do that? Maybe. Maybe I'm being a
I
bit
think
mean.
some people, I think some people can. It's interesting. I've
Yeah,
tried,
probably I'm being a bit
I've
narrow-minded.
tried, and I haven't. If when I've tried to like make a song in a certain vein or something, like a certain emotional state, it fails. However, sometimes I've been able to take being in a very unsteady emotional place, like say after an argument or, I'm upset about something, and channeling that into music. And I'm happy to say that more often than not, it's yielded like some actual good workable songs.
Mhm.
But it's almost like an emotional practice for me to like, keep functioning after, I've had, a spat with the wife or something like that, and move through that. But yeah, like actually like, okay, we're gonna sit down and, write a a melancholy thing. Is it's like, nah, not necessarily. It's like I'll sit down and I'm open to what I try to be open to what I'm hearing as I'm working. I don't know
Mm.
for you if you've ever looked at like when you sit down to make music, like what do you go to first? Like
Mm.
a friend
It's
got
a
me,
good
my friend
question.
Nathan got me thinking about this. He's like, I if I'm in a rut, sometimes I will not make any drums or I won't approach the drums at all. Or I'll do them last. And that's an interesting thing to do. Like I'll, I'll make sure I'm not playing instantly on the first track, whatever that's armed in Ableton. I'll like move around, or maybe even though I have a template, I'll switch things around. I wonder if there's like if you can speak on that, like
Yeah,
in your process.
I think what you're doing is really important because it disrupts habits,
Mm.
and when we're making tracks, we want to be learning as we're making. That's part of the adventure
Yeah.
and fun of it. And also, I didn't mean to sound dismissive of, say, someone is having relationship problems and they write a song.
Oh
I
no,
think it's
I didn't think you were at all. No.
oh good, and it's cool to hear you've done that. I think though sometimes there's a bit of a dishonesty in that. To be honest, when you're making music, it's action and reaction. You're
Mm.
you're like with clay, and uh, to be honest, within a short amount of time, whatever's happened recently might go out the window, and you're thrilled
Yeah.
about getting somewhere to a new place through the music. And also, I think those emotions that aren't often touched on in music. You're driving in a car and a street lights. I don't know what it's like in your area, but in London, there's a certain hue of amber, and street lights whiz past
Yeah.
your windscreen, and it's smeared in the droplets if it's
Yeah.
raining.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you see these dark buildings rising in the distance. And
Mm.
it's kind of a grey, neutral, in-between zone that I can't put in English, but
Uh,
that grey feeling is what I'm
the
going after.
word, yeah, liminal. The word comes to
Liminal,
mind.
thank you.
You're like you're in a transitory state. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like I could fly off in my car into that world
Yeah.
forever. It's so
Right.
attractive, but it's hard to explain to people, and you're not going to find it in most songs, really, because
No, I almost, I kind of get what you're saying. It's like you feel sometimes like you're privy to seeing the world sort of in an interstitial way, sort of like you're seeing between the slats, if that
mm,
makes
yes,
sense.
exactly.
Yeah, and you're just you're almost like you're downloading or taking in some information in a different way,
Mm,
and then you're that you can then put out later in a song. But yeah, I like that liminal state.
exactly. It's pure
Like it,
phenomena. Yeah,
yeah,
the signifiers that are normally attached to what's around you disappear, and it gets kind of weird. Like sometimes I look at logos. Do you say logos or logos? I always get this wrong. Um,
we say logos here, but I'll take logos. That's fine. I like the way
and
that you say minotaur and not minotaur, and I know it's
oh,
probably
I knew
I
I
think
was saying that wrong. I
no no
said
no 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 because I think not to get hung up on language, but I think the island the Greeks would call it Minos, not Minos. I'm not sure, but anyway, but go on.
you're the writer here, so I'll take your
Yes, but I'm American, and we all know we're just speaking a funny little parrot language of the Queen's English. So
but you'll see signs come, and you know that they have a meaning that we all are meant to abide by, but in that moment sometimes this is going to sound so nuts. I can't believe what I'm sharing, but there's strong feelings that emerge off the colors,
hmm,
and you imagine yourself in a dystopian future, and
yeah,
it's less about surface meanings and more about you're getting lost in a phenomenological weird terrain where
Yeah, like
uh,
interpreting the surroundings in a new way.
yeah, and that's when senses cross over. So smell becomes
Yeah.
color, and color becomes sound.
Yes.
Uh, it's very hard to portray that in words. Maybe you can as a writer, but I find it's hard to talk about your music because, or any music, after a certain point, especially when you're aiming
Yeah,
at
it
that
is. Like it's
feeling.
interesting. Like, yeah, I don't. I mean, some songs I can talk about having a specific meaning, but like something I've thought about in my music, I don't know if I've necessarily said as openly, is that they're they are stories I'm telling, but not with words, and I don't
Mm.
even know necessarily what the story is. And the title might not reflect might mean a specific thing, but it what it means may not have quite the relationship to the song that like the listener might think. For instance,
Mm.
like Walk the Frontier, I was thinking in that it was because it had a very kind of, a good pace and good tempo and stuff. I thought about, I was talking about the movie, was it Walkabout with the old Australian film with Jenny Gutter? Sorry. And, it's an amazing film, but like, just talk about like, these two people, these three people going on this journey in the Australian outback, and like it's another world, especially from westerns. But in that, and you're in this between state where it's like you could be in the present or you could be 40,000 years ago or
Mm.
something. It reminds me, one of my favorite things to ask people is, what year does the movie The Lion King take place? And
Yeah,
everyone's like, oh, and you're like, wait, no, it
not
might,
96. Yeah.
I mean, it could be, but it's very much like, I mean, obviously it's made in a certain time. It reflects you know, the wishes of whatever the producers and creators, but like as itself, it's like it exists like sort of out of time
Mm.
in its own place. And like, that's like, if, I should be so lucky that someone after I die hears a song of mine. It's like, oh my God, it sounds so fresh and new. And
That's the hope, isn't it? And
yeah,
a lot of what you're saying and what I was trying to say is this idea of abstraction. And
mm,
find it strange. I asked a musician friend this. Uh, Maybe people are just as angry with literature as music,
yeah,
but with a poem, no one's upset that a poem abstracts its meaning, and no one expects a poem to say, "I feel sad." I can't come up with anything
yeah,
dreadful. I mean,
yeah,
unless,
yeah,
unless it's like a postmodern, deliberate
right,
subverting of itself. But yeah, when you do abstraction in music, abstraction rather, maybe because it's physical and they can hear the sound, they get really
yeah,
upset.
yes.
Uh, Whereas when you read, there's a nice distance, and so a poem doesn't offend people as much as a bunch of
I
sounds
wonder
being
how much, yeah, I
names.
wonder how much of that is just sort of our expectation of music, that it's like, you know, by and large, it's supposed to be something that's entertaining and fun
Mm.
and nice, and it signifies, a joyful event like a wedding or a birth, and when we say, well, I'm gonna use this, 15 tone tuning, and people want to like pluck out their own eyes. Like, yeah, you're asking people to get well outside of their comfort zone, which, yeah, it's funny. We're 4.5 minutes now, and
Ah,
Henry's threatening to piss himself. But like,
mm.
a friend of mine asked me if I could do a show, actually like a local TV broadcast, and I'm like, absolutely. And the first thing I thought of was comfort zones and getting out of it, and I was like, I'm bringing out the Soma Lyra 8, because it's just such a monstrous thing. It's really hard to tune, and it makes horrible
Wow.
noises, but it is the machine you get. Like, I realized when I got it, a friend of mine was like, "Why did you buy that?" I was like, "I need to get out of my comfort zone." And he's like, "Ah ha ha, that's gonna get you there." And it's true, because that thing's like, oh, it puts you in an uncomfortable place, but it's great as a performer, because like it really takes you out of your space. But yeah, I think yeah, when you make difficult, music that's challenging and changing people's preconceptions, it gets them upset. Yeah, you don't think about people like, no one walked out of an E.E. Cummings poetry reading and tried to set the venue on fire or tear the seats out or like, Yeats, but like the first performances of like some
Rite of
like
Spring.
yeah, Rite of Spring, like people are like losing their fucking mind, or like Bob Dylan plugging in a guitar. Jesus, we're talking about that what 70 years later almost because I think, the clock's running out, but I think you know why it is. My theory is that music is such an integral part of human being of being a human
Mm,
that and the rhythms that we're used to like 4/4 and stuff is largely like based on like the sound of our own heart and our breathing is very much in out except that when you go away from that and veer from it, oh, it does mess people up because you're challenging their perception of like their own rhythms and
mm.
melodies and how they're experiencing stuff.
Yeah, you're going off frame, and
Yeah,
I guess some people are excited by things hanging outside the canvas, and how much you think you are hanging outside the canvas is up for debate, right? Like to you
yeah,
or me, we're not trying to upset anyone, and it seems really normal. But then,
yeah,
if people have seen something over and over again as an established pattern, and we're pattern seeking,
yeah.
yeah,
Yes, well,
it
you're
doesn't
you're
matter.
fucking with people's expectations because you're throwing their pattern seeking off,
I
and
like that.
and yeah, we're such pattern seeking creatures that it messes us up. It's funny just we have 1 minute. The agony we put ourselves through
Yeah,
for this thing
yeah,
we
yeah.
we love, and it's just so funny because it's just like you drive yourself totally mental, and then like if you're lucky, people pay a little attention to it, but most of the time it's like, you know, but that's kind of the nature of our world these days. Um,
Having said that, do you feel we're in a better time? Because I don't mean this in a name droppy way, but I was talking to Steve Roach and he said 2015 and 16 was pretty dreadful. Like it felt like it was a real low ebb of interest in
yeah,
finished works. And that's
yeah,
why he released an album called Invisible because he felt invisible. And if
I,
he's
I
saying
like
that,
that.
then yeah,
Yeah, if I did that, all my albums would probably be called, "Working in a Vacuum, Volume 17."
yeah,
So I
that's how
can
I
I can
feel.
I can totally relate. That's interesting. I mean, 10 years ago, you know, 10 years ago. I mean, in some ways, I do. I guess I'd be curious. If I would have asked him, if I were there to say, like explain. I think, what I think is better in a way is that I think in some ways there are systems that are in place that are great for sharing your music
Mm,
and for getting it out like they're like because Bandcamp is there. Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta turn
yeah.
my fan back on. We're in this wonderful period right now in weather-wise in Maine where like May turns into, I think I called it Mayvember, because it's like cold and gray, but the leaves and trees are budding. So it's like you're simultaneously like freezing and also cold. So forgive me. Um, I think there's better systems in place. Like I think Bandcamp is a little more established and a little
Mm,
more known. Um, I think there's also like a lot of um, uh, kind of middle ways to not sort of like middleware, but like something like Get Music, which I use, is like you pay a certain amount, and it generates codes, and you can just send stuff out, to people, and it's a great way to get interest and get people
mm,
listening. Um, and so, yeah, I would think I think it's better in some ways like that. I think there's also like, I mean, the major thing is like, Steve Roach, the master, a sensei, has been doing this so long, and we're, you know, he's, working in a specific, somewhat a defined and somewhat, I don't, not the word narrow.
I know what you mean. He's established.
It's not like obviously pop,
Mm,
and it's brilliant experimental music. And I think it's interesting because like within that uh, realm, it's like, um, I mean, I think it's not a limited audience. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say, but anyway, you can reach people better. But what I'm saying is, no one's going to write like an IDM song that's going to be a TikTok hit like
oh,
that.
you're
But at
absolutely
this,
right.
but at the same time,
Yeah.
there's TikTok and things like that do work. Like I do get some good engagement from like little reels and stuff I do off Instagram, even though I kind of have to hold my nose to use it. But um, I think, yeah, it is easier in some ways now to sort of get heard, but you're still fighting to get heard above the fray like almost all the time. And like if you don't just work at it, if not 24/7, how about 18/7, you know, uh, your music's going to sink down pretty fast unless it's in like a top 40, as we say, or a pop music vein. And
Mm,
also then there's that you're competing against um, now the streamers. Well, Spotify is just big on building AI music, so that they don't have to pay anybody.
yeah. Yeah,
Which
I
is
didn't really think
insane to
that.
think that like a human being's idea of a perfect system of like delivering music is that there's as few humans involved as possible. And that's purely so you can make money. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
You can explain it to me that it isn't. And I said the same thing to Robert Henke of Mono Lake and Ableton, and I'll say it now. It's very hard in that mode to not convince me that it is some talentless person who does not have a creative impulse um, to make music purely, I think, because they think it's easy
Yeah.
and it's simple and anybody can do it, and I can teach a computer to like and and it's just not that way. But
Mm.
they have enough, there is enough money behind them and whatever and force they can use it to basically occupy so much of the bandwidth at a given time that all you're going to get is you know the robot version of Love Me Do, which I can't even imagine what that is. But so that's interesting though. I like that idea and thinking, I think about that further.
Yeah, it
But yeah,
it surprised me, but it does tally with my experience. It's obviously what you said is so true about AI and various other factors that are seeming to say another message. But I would say that there's a hunger, a growing thirst for the kind of thing you do,
yeah,
and he certainly perceived it too. And I hadn't indicated or hinted that I was thinking the same way. He, out of the blue, simply said, there's never been more interest in my music, and it feels really wonderful to have
it's
this renewed.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah,
That's so
it was
great.
significant.
I wonder, and I'd be curious if he would be able to break it down in terms of demographics. Is it like you know who's getting into it? Is it like is it younger people, like people younger than you and I, someone in their 20s or something, or
Mm.
is it like people um, getting into it, at like let's say my age, but getting into it now. I'll tell you something that's kind of tangential, but sort of makes it relates. Um, I've been watching the American TV show ER, uh,
Oh, that,
uh,
yeah.
binging it. Now, when it, I'm old enough, Robert, that I remembered one day powering up the cold power telly, and after the woman came along and I put two eggs in the basket, she waved to her husband and he tied the wires together and the television was no. But like I remember it coming on and just being like, I can't watch this. I don't like medical dramas. I don't like blood. Blah, blah, blah. Now I'm just like more, oh, can I watch it on three screens? And it's I don't know why. A part of it is like it's actually really good storytelling and great actors, and I love seeing actors and like how they where they started, and like there was a guest episode like with Ewan McGregor in like 1996 or something, and I'm like
Mm.
he'd made he'd made Train Spotting, but he hadn't done any of the Star Wars films yet. So that was amazing. And like other people. Oh, and the actress, what's her name? Kingston, who was on Doctor Who.
Oh, yeah.
That was her. I don't know. She played like River. Is that she played his daughter or something? Anyway, she's on it and it's amazing. But I'm watching it, from the show from 30 years ago, but now, and I'm understanding why people were getting into it.
Mm.
Man, and it still translates. It's still interesting stuff. So yeah, so Steve said, I would be curious to like who's getting into it. And is it like the pandemic was interesting because there's people like people were getting into old TV series during the pandemic. I wonder what's driving that because it is interesting. Like, yeah, I'm always amazed at how like I when we talked the last time between then and now, I've just been sort of looking at how like learning about new music or new styles or like a new artist. Like
Mm.
uh, I got this great compilation. Something I do lately is I will I will look at people on Bandcamp, people who follow me or bought my music. I'll go through and I'll follow them and I'll go see what they're buying. Compilation he had of a label from like Dublin, and you know I'm not such an idiot that I'm going to say like, oh, Dublin has electronic music because they've all, of course they have, and there's been a
Mm.
lot of great bands from that forever and ever. But it was fascinating, like just all this new music coming out of there, and I just heard like a bunch of new stuff, and it led me to like two or three different artists where I like put a bunch of their stuff on wish list and was able to hunt down, and listen to further. But um, I completely forgot why I went on that tangent. I apologize.
You were you
I've
were
had my medication.
discussing the audience or the age group of potential listeners and and then you moved
Yeah,
on to follow
yeah,
people.
and it's an interesting thing about this music of Oz, the sting of Oz, because it's we come from different backgrounds and stuff, but I think we work in somewhat similar modality, and but it's funny when I was yeah, it was 3 years ago. Um, I sent out a link for like an album of mine, and for the EP Unearthed, and this journalist in the UK, his name is Joe Muggs. Um,
Oh, yeah, I like his
he,
writing,
oh, he's
yeah, a
great.
lot.
I love him, and he
Mm.
was very kindly. He said, "Hey, I'm going to put this in Bandcamp Daily," and I'm like, "Right on." And
Nice.
it went in Bandcamp Daily, and like in a single day, I had something ridiculous, like 2,000 listens, like
Mm.
stuff I'd never done before, and a lot of people, a lot more people bought that. And what I realized was that a there was a bigger reach for this kind of music than I thought, um,
Mm.
and b I was not working in as much of a vacuum as I thought.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and to what Steve said about Invisible, I was like, wow, it's not as I don't feel as much like that. It's still, it's still work to get heard because, you're you're there's plenty of other people doing similar music and wanting to get heard, but it's amazing to me how, I think like Sean said this in that kiosk AMA, like it's amazing to me how much great music there is out there that
Yeah.
a lot of people aren't hearing. Um,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And
uh, uh, like for
some of it
instance,
no one's hearing, like
yeah,
literally no one. I found
yeah,
some music
like
where I'm the only
well,
listener, and it's incredible music. Um,
yeah. I should have my Bandcamp wish list just so I can go down the list of stuff. But well, like one thing, like shout out to Matt. I'm gonna say his name wrong. I think Matt Mascarenas from we know him from as Mace Matt from Mace underscore Matt
oh,
from
he's so
Mastodon.
sweet. Yeah,
Wonderful
nice guy.
guy. He after that I did that listening party on Sunday, he sent me a link to his album that he did of like live modular stuff with a friend, and I can't, I've been listening to it every day and every
Wow.
night, and it's beautiful. Yeah, they record. I asked him, and he hasn't got back to me yet, but I'm sure he will. I asked him like, did you record this live? Like, and he mentioned something like that, and
Mm.
and it's really beautiful. I'll send you the link to it. But one thing is like he
Yeah,
said,
I want to hear that.
oh, because I was talking about how on the listening party was for my album Parody Town, and the for a lot of EPs I'll put like a beatless track at the end. And I said, and I was talking about how, writing a song without a beat is not like, oh, you write a song with drums and then just take them out and voila.
No,
And we were
that's not
talking. He
like
said,
that.
yeah, he
Mhm.
said something funny. He said a lot of times people say they hear drums in our music, but we have not made a, a song with a beat in it for 10 years. And I'm
That's
like,
very
wow,
cool.
yeah. And I was listening to it, and you can definitely think like, oh, there's a kick drum there. And like, no, it's just they're working hard to create it so that you're hearing I think instead of a kick, it's like the beating of two different waveforms coming
Mm.
together so it hits as one. But that's like one great thing, and there's like a bazillion other things out there.
Yeah, you're right. I know a
I,
few young people who don't even want to release their music for some strange reason, and
and that I'm like, I want someone to study that because it's fascinating. Like,
mm. It's almost
is it
attractive in this day and age. But then I'm urging get it out. Yeah, at least someone's going
yeah,
to enjoy it.
yeah, I mean, as someone who sat on his music and hid it from the world for like 10, 12 years,
Oh yeah, I remember you said that.
you know, like because I was terrified of how it would come across. That idea of not sending it out to people and just playing for myself, I'm like, what? What? That's just absolutely alien to me. But
Mm.
I can understand it. It's not that I can understand it. It's more like I'm sure there's a viewpoint there. I'd love to hear it. I don't get it though, but I can understand that there's like um,
To be
you know,
honest, maybe you think I'm a terrible person for this, but I actually don't care if they use. I don't think
Robert.
I've
I'd
tried
be
the
hard pressed to think you were a terrible person unless you're like, hang on, I gotta go to the loo and strangle a kitten or two just to feel better about myself.
Please cut
No,
that.
yeah,
I just, I'm
absolutely,
like,
yeah,
what are
yeah,
they going
yeah,
to do with it? I know it sounds bad, but the benefit I get from interacting on SoundCloud, it's not huge, but there's a nice little group of. I don't think it. Yeah, to be honest, everyone's using your music. If you have to rip it off Spotify if you're going to
yeah. It's
pull it
crazy.
through
Like
everywhere.
when I heard someone saying that, and I forget if it was you or somebody else was like, oh yeah, I gotta uh what is I gotta pull my music off of SoundCloud, and I'm like, well, I was like, well, shit, I just dropped money for a SoundCloud Pro for a year, and they don't refund
Mm,
that, so I'll leave it up. I probably will leave some stuff up there. I mean, yeah, like you said, it's hard. They are from what little I understand. It's like you know this immense amount of energy is being expended for AI for it to like, you know, bottom troll with the biggest nets it can um, all like, human content, music and art and whatever. And it's really hard to escape that.
Hmm.
I admire the people who are like, well, I'm going to opt out of Google and I'm going to
Yeah, I
opt
do
out
too.
of, this and that. And I'm like, great, I wish you luck. But like, like some people you can't afford to. Like, it's like,
Right, that's exactly it. I get work through SoundCloud, and
yeah,
you have to use Google for work. I have to use it for work.
yeah,
That it's just not possible to really. Well, it is possible, but then I'll have to become like a waiter or something, because
exactly.
which
Exactly. No, you can, that's
I'm
the
not very
thing.
good
It's
at.
like, no, and I'm not either. Like, I've been thinking about that. I mean, again. So anyway, back to what you're saying. It's like, I'm not useless. It's just and I also, and for me too, you know, I forget if I'm pretty sure I told you about this, but like, I was in a very bad car accident in 2018.
Oh
And
yeah, I actually didn't remember. Thank you for
yeah,
bringing.
and well, it's not, I don't try to bring it up all the time, but it comes up as a memory. I'm like that, and that really shook me. Like, you know, I remember rolling, well, no, sorry, spinning 3 times first, and then
Hmm.
rolling 3 times. And the first spin is like, oh my God, I'm going to die. My daughter's here in the car with me, and my dog is Sparky, not Henry. And the second one was like, all the things in my life I wanted to do. And then the third spin is like, come on, what the hell? And then we started rolling. And then the terror started all over again. And this is in the span of like maybe 5 seconds. And
Wow.
it was the same thing. It was like, oh my God, we're rolling. We're not going to stop. And the second one, it's like, oh my God. And by the third one, it's like, come on already. Like, this is tired. And we came to a stop then. And you know, the first thing I remember was my dog licking my face. And then I turned to Sophia. She's fine. I'm fine. No visible blood. And I said, you can start crying now. You are okay. And, I started taking care of it there. But I realized that later that I had not necessarily as much of the life flashing before my eyes, but, three specific um, things went through my mind. The first was talking to my father about not selling these vacation camps that we'd had in my family forever, that were my
Hmm.
grandfather's, and really being adamant to him that I wanted to actually rent them. And I know sometimes when you say, summer home or extra property, people think, that you're like a Rockefeller or a Rothschild and you just got
No, I
money.
don't.
And it's like, no,
No, I get it.
this, yeah, this area is like, there's it's like working class folks have a summer place to go fishing.
Yeah,
So there
it's the
was
same in
that.
Hungary. We're having the same
Yeah,
discussions about whether we should sell a house in Hungary because we can't afford it. But I don't want to
yeah,
lose that. Yeah, I get it.
exactly. And it's like, yeah, and you know that, and then some stuff about just realizing where my relationship with my wife was, and that I wanted it to improve and to heal some things. And the final thing was like, if I die now, like a lot of my dreams are will have been unrealized.
Mm.
And I wanted, I've experienced amazing things with music, and like I want to make my life about something. It was more that I wanted to fill my life with something that fulfilled me and I could be passionate about. And it took a while, and that ended up becoming music. And then so that was in 2018. But then with the pandemic and with my father's death, it was really coming to realize that was going to be the thing and the focus. And I'm just feeling like now, all this time later, 7 years after the car accident, um, and 4 after my father's death, that I'm just at the point where I'm like sort of able to like put that into work to a certain degree, and but also
Mm.
like, yes, exist in the normal world with regular people. My earliest memory is of me as a like probably an infant, crawling on the floor, hearing like banjo music or something, knowing my parents,
Nice.
it was probably Pete Seeger. something of his, and then like a lot of musical stuff. And my grandfather was an amazing piano player and multi-instrumentalist. In
Mm.
fact, when he died, among the guitars and accordions we got out of his house, he had a mandolin. I wish we kept it, made from the hide of an armadillo. Um,
That's
and
wild.
yeah, that would have been great to keep. But like some music was always there, and I absorbed this lesson as a child that you know you can't make it as a musician unless you um, know your scales and can read notation and stuff like that.
Mm.
Which I realized is total bullshit because my favorite artists are not all of them, but a lot of them are self-taught musicians who make
Yeah.
incredible music from that I'm around. So um, yeah, so I think you know what I think it is for people like us is also nowadays it's really it's you're struggling. I want to say struggling like we're failing, but struggle in I'll be really controversial. Struggle in the way that the word jihad means struggle, not
Mm.
fight, but so much as the
Internal.
effort. Yeah, exactly. It's the effort um, to like want to put forth your best work, sort of as your best human spirit. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, that's really
And like,
beautiful.
and this is what I like. Alice knows. Like Alice is a great yoga teacher, and and getting the world to hear that is a huge pain in the ass
Yeah.
because there's all sorts of stuff. But and so it's the same thing for me. It's like at I know I'm really good at certain things, and like well, you and I talking, I realized from that it's like I really want to talk. I get really jazzed up when I talk to people about the things I love.
Yeah, you're
And
very gifted at that, and it's very
thank you, thank
engaging
you.
and yeah.
I appreciate that because I really felt a lot, and I will say this after you said that, after we talked last week, and I realized how buoyed I was feeling and how much better I've been feeling from talking than in a long time. I was like, I got to do something with this. And
Hmm.
I was talking with my therapist and telling her about it. She's like, that's great. She's like, and I said, I was thinking, starting a podcast. And I'm like,
Yeah.
everybody and their dog has a podcast. And she's like, well, can you make any money from a podcast? And I said, yeah. I mean, you're out
Mm.
there again, like talk about, you're putting yourself out there, you know, trying to get heard above the masses. But like, if you have the right, if you're lucky enough to get heard, you get picked up by a few sponsors, like you can do okay. And
Yeah. Yeah. My
I can
friends
think of
do that.
lots. Yeah, exactly. And I know people, and I actually have an idea for a podcast. Um, I started writing. Basically the podcast idea is. I know we're so fucking far off topic, Robert, but it's okay for the podcast. Okay, so the idea for the podcast is it's called "Desperately Seeking Humans." It's a
Ooh.
it's a play off, the Madonna movie "Desperately Seeking Susan," but also "Desperately Seeking," which was an old like classified ads, sort of cliche headline. But I'm gonna have I haven't thought of them all, but it's three questions to ask the 3 to 5 questions to ask the guest, and among them, the final one is you know Robert Logan.
I feel
I am
honored.
asking you now: are you human, and what defines being a human, and how can you prove that yourself that you are human? And you know, I'm lucky that I can think
Great
of
question.
like 3 or 4 people to like ask that, but I do think I can have like a good conversation with folks. I got to get my Zoom paid for so I can record her. But that's what I was thinking. And like, and it just, yeah, it really like, I get like, uh, I finally realized and let myself realize how much music and being involved in like with musicians and stuff buoys me.
Mm.
Like from like your the listening party for Regenesis was a blast.
Yeah, that was
And
fun.
yeah, and just and like because I I don't know about you, but like I feel separated from, I'm not going to whine, but I feel separated from my tribe a lot to a certain degree.
Mm,
Part of that is I'm a little isolating and I'm getting better at that,
mm.
but part of that is because I've just always had, friends, far-flung friends. I mean, basically since the internet, whose interests were, very aligned
Aligned.
with mine. And,
Mm.
part of me, like, in my rich interior fantasy life, I quit America, I moved to England, and I'm suddenly there, and I'm going to be immersed in like working with musicians and, production and gigs galore. I know that won't really happen, but it just made me realize further and further back to like the thought that I had, you know, with my car accident was like, I want to be doing something with, I want to be doing something with my God given talents,
I agree.
not toil simply for money to
Yeah,
pay for things. And
yeah.
it's like, I think I can do it in, this capitalist corporate world, but it requires some work and some time.
Hmm.
For me, it was like, oh, you want to do this? Well, you're going to have to get over some shit from your past, and you're
Yeah.
going to have to, and then, oh, now you can work. Okay. Well, now, unfortunately, there's mounting fascism in America. But, keep going. You can work. And that's the thing too. Now, for me, is like, yeah, part of the thing is just, yeah, I think of the Talking Heads song "Life During Wartime," and
Oh
sort of
yeah.
how do you work and how do you be productive in this time when the world seemingly is not only doesn't want to hear from you, but is actively trying to quash your voice and
That's right.
quiet you down. And it's hard because you and I see, because we see the world through this, for lack of a better word, this artist's lens, in a very sensitive, not in a weak way, but sensitive meaning aware and open and
Sensitized.
picking. Yeah,
Yeah. Mm.
exactly. So we see this world and we interact with this world, but it's people like us who end up being not just like the people who make music for other folks to tap their toes to or whatever, but like it's a chronicle it's a chronicle and a document of the state of the world in that moment.
Right. That's a good way of phrasing it.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to necessarily be about like 2025, mid-May, but it's like something from the period, and that's what we're doing. Like
Mm.
I think in a way, and it's we see that we know that's our way that we communicate best with the world.
Mm.
Unfortunately, it's also a world that less and less values um, artists, and
That's the shame of it.
it really is. It's really so awful because music is it's thrilling, music is healing, music
It's
is,
divine, in my opinion. Yeah.
yeah, it's divine. Exactly. That's my opinion too. Like I am, my definition of God is probably very different from yours. Although when you said, the Quaker thing, I was like, oh, okay, he gets it. But like, I think, yeah, that it is a divine um, gift to see the world and want to turn it, your experience of it, into something uh, uh, tangible, be it music,
Mm.
be it art, be it writing. This
Mm.
when I said before, our work is a snapshot of the world we live in, and I feel the same way. Someone said this about science fiction, was that
Mm.
all science fiction, no matter how far flung, and futuristic it is really a reflection of the society it's made to,
Oh yeah.
to a certain degree,
That wasn't
which
within
is not.
Gibbs.
Yeah, and it's not like such a revolutionary thing, but you think about it, like if you compare, like, I don't know, if you were to do like an academic studying, uh, 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 compare like Doctor Who at its origin or something with what England was like in the early 60s, or Star Trek and what America and or the world was like in the late 60s, in their given time. Um, and I love someone, I think it was Gibson himself, who said, as great as all science fiction is and how predictive people say that Star Trek was, nobody but nobody thought of the internet.
Yeah.
And there were some people who definitely touched on it. And if I were to say that on Reddit, like an AMA, like the keyboard would explode from people trying to get at me and saying, no, that's not true because so and
So
so
it's
thought of this, and
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
yeah, but they got aspects of it, but they didn't get the whole thing. And of course, no one could see what the effect of taking what was initially, a small DARPA Defense and Research Project Administration, the U.S. military experiment on keeping computer systems linked up in the event of a disaster or war. They took that system and let the humans at it, and we have the internet now. So anyway, I was talking about snapshots, but yeah, so yeah, it's a as always, I think it's a challenging time for artists, and I would love to see at some point. I think it's like everything else. It's gonna be a bit of a bloody battle. I would love to see some point in the future where and not just necessarily like there's universal basic income so that people can live and function, but that
Mm.
there's like there's something in place so that if someone chooses to go in the arts, they're not immediately like expected to compose a great work or paint something while fending off sharks or zombies at the same. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
Like they shouldn't have to create their art under duress,
No.
under although as we know, limitations and constraints are what build our art. But at the same
Mhm.
time, I think Kafka probably would have made some even more great works if he was a little healthier. It
Yeah, I've
wasn't.
been reading about his little,
Yeah,
what should you call them, little, he had some major body image issues, which I think led to metamorphosis in a way, but
yeah,
also didn't help probably. And he didn't sleep, which I can draw comfort from.
yeah, yeah. I know. No, and that not sleeping is just, yeah, it's the worst. As we know. Um, so yeah, it's a strange world, but but at the same time, through all that struggle, it's like I'm like, they're not going to stop me, and they're not going to get me. Like I'm still going to do this,
I like that.
but
I like that.
I'm going to be honest, about living in the world. I always think of my dad, my grandfather, whom I never met because he died when my father was like very young, like early 20s. But when my grandmother married him, she knew he was diabetic, which in the 20s and stuff was not a death sentence, but you had to kind of manage it carefully. And that he came from a nice family, and he was a yacht broker.
What does that mean?
He sold boats,
Oh, I see.
and big boats and little boats. Yeah, well, come the Great Depression, and suddenly the family money's gone, and he finds himself at some point demonstrating ping pong tables in the basement of Macy's department store in New York City, like all day long.
Wow.
And I'm like, God bless him. He went there and put food on this table for his family. And I was like, and as I've said to Alice and I've said to my therapist, like, I'm not quite at playing ping pong in the basement of Macy's just yet, but things are a little challenging. Um, I've done stuff like that in the past, and I'm willing to do it. But at this point, I'm like, I feel like there can be something else
Mm.
better for it. And I have had this extraordinary. I don't know what it is, but in my life, I've known a lot of people who are, either in the thing, the arena that I want to work in, you know, who are like music, who are very successful, and I'm sort of adjacent to, not just Moby, who I went to high school with, but like some writer friends of mine are, they have some episodes in of their stories in the Netflix series Love and Death and Robots.
Nice.
Yeah, and like some others have, and they also those guys also got movie deals coming up and other things like that. And it's very strange to be that close to the thing you want,
Not be the
but not
person.
but not have it. Yeah,
Yeah, I know
uh,
that
you
feeling.
know, and yeah, and it's frustrating, but I'm also like, God damn it, I'm not stopping just because of that.
No,
Like, I'm not
comparisons of
stopping because I'm not,
your
like I, I was talking about this with my friend Paul, who's a film. He works in L.A. He's a filmmaker. He's been done a lot of director of photography jobs, and I said, one of my biggest fears in life is that I'm going to die, and no one will remember my work. And
mm.
and and Paul's like, oh yeah, yeah, I have that all the time. I've had that since I was like
Really, he
19.
has it too.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, and it's just so funny. But once I said it out loud, kind of, I grew sort of not used to the idea, but I was like, okay, that may be true. However,
Mm.
it's not a reason to stop for me. It's like a reason to keep going. And now I'm more of the mind that, like, God forbid I should die tomorrow or something. Like, I have a breadth of work behind me
Yeah, it's out.
that is, yeah, that is out there and it's pretty cool. Like, some folks, I've had some family members say, well, oh yeah, you're 56, you're not exactly in the top 40. Where's your music going? And I'm like,
I've had
the
that.
mere the mere fact that my music has been played on the radio, however much or not since 1996 means that my music has been traveling into outer space for the last almost 30 years with all
Mm.
this other stuff. And that it's amazing to think that even though it might pass them by, that someone on another planet is going to hear that, and
Yeah,
it's
that's
out there.
in itself is magic. That's
Mm-hmm.
magical.
And I won't say that buoys me through every single rough time, but it is a really beautiful thing to think about.
I think the same thing. I've been considering the fact anyone hears it is a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I don't know why I'm convinced by that now. That never used to be enough. But
Yeah.
my dad, who was a primary school teacher for 30 years, said, I realized I was anxious all the time. I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
recommend a normal job. And he did it for 30 years. And if it gives you a
And
breakdown,
that's
what's the point?
yeah. And that's the thing too. For me, and that's the thing too. I didn't say in that. I was realizing, yeah, I'm anxious almost all the time anyway, and I
Yeah,
spent
the last thing
many
you
years
need.
hiding that. But at a job, I was like, yeah, I'm like, no, I don't want to go through that. That's horse shit that someone has to go through that in life, and that you're supposed to
Exactly.
like do that. So, all right, so